Allah is acquainted with all of your deeds. So I think, again, within faith communities, is this drive to reach out to those in need, and something, when we look out into our communities around us, we ask these questions and share these values.
Thank you. Okay, and I am Natalia Rudiak. I am with the ReImagine Appalachia team and with the Faith and Action team, and I identify within the Byzantine Catholic faith tradition, and Pope Francis has written extensively on sustainability and climate issues. And in fact, if you read many of his works, and the works of the church, it's very interesting because within these texts, while they are ensconced in a climate and environmental frame, the poor are mentioned dozens of more times than the environment. And so I'll just read these couple of quotes here. It says, "Today, however, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice and debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor," italics in the original. And the violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate your presence. And if you have any more thoughts or any more inspiring words that you would like to share from your faith tradition or otherwise, please put them in the chat. We often say here at ReImagine Appalachia that as our faith team is the moral driver, the ethical driver of our work here, and actually keeps us grounded and why we're doing all of this. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Anderson, who's going to lead us a little bit through what the practicalities of our Faith and Action team have been so far.
Yes, again, my name is Kim Anderson. I'm with the Evangelical Environmental Network, and Natalia was just kind of alluding to, what is the moral imperative? And for us at EEN, we care about children's health because they're the most impacted. Their little lungs and minds and hearts are much more impacted than ours as adults by some of these issues. So we focus a lot on that, and it resonates with our audience. But I recognize that it might be different for everybody. So looking forward to hearing your answers in a few minutes about some of the questions that we have. Like I said earlier, the ReImagine Appalachia Faith and Action team was an outcome of last year's summit. There was a breakout group, and we ended up, a few of us gathered and started doing some work throughout the year. And it's been a fun group to work with, and I feel like we've gotten quite a bit done. So you can see the names of the people here. You've already heard from Natalia and Jeff. We have Amani Reed, who is our Faith and Action coordinator. And maybe if you want to raise your hand like electronically, then your picture will show up as I introduce people. We also have Robin Blakeman, who's with West Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. Kathleen Hrabowski, I apologize if I butchered that, with Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light. Jenny McNeil with FACT Ohio. Wendy Tarr with Vincentian Ohio Action Network and Arch Reentry, and then Rick Wilson, American Friends Service Committee and West Virginia Economic Justice. So we have a core team, but we are very excited to expand and diversify our team. So we would love if some of you join us after hearing about what we're about today. Natalia, can you advance? Thank you. We meet about 1 to 2 times a month to discuss a few different things. One is event series and events that we put on with relevant information about the infrastructure bills that you heard so much about before. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those upcoming events in a minute. Also outreach about ReImagine Appalachia priorities. So we, reach out to others and let people know about the priorities of ReImagine Appalachia and how we look at it from a faith perspective. And then ReImagine Your Community was an amazing event that started in, I always get it wrong, is it Butler County? Beaver County.
Beaver County, yeah.
Beaver County, Pennsylvania. And, it was just a group of people that came together and talked about what they could do in their community. And we've taken that and turned it into a toolkit that's focused on faith. And the idea is that a church might host an event in their community to have a conversation about what are some things that we can do in our community. And that could be, the people on your block or in your county, whatever, how big or small you want to make it. And there's an event tomorrow, the breakout group that's focused on faith. We'll be talking a little bit more about that. And you can move on. Thanks. And back in December, we had an event called Harvesting the Fruit, an intro to new federal funding opportunities for faith-based nonprofits and houses of worship. You may or may not know that, there've always been tax credits and different things for people that go solar, but many of those didn't apply to nonprofits. And with the Inflation Reduction Act, nonprofits can now apply for some of those funds. And there's a lot of exciting funds for churches and faith-based nonprofits. And like they talked about, we want to make sure that these funds get out to people and they get in the right hands. So this was a great opportunity to learn about some of those from a high level to give churches and nonprofits an idea about how they can move forward with, some of these projects. Next slide. So we have some events coming up over the next few months. First, on March 9th, we have an environmental justice for all event, like Natalia shared in the quote from the Pope. I think faith and social justice and some of these things are very closely linked. And some of the people that are most impacted are marginalized communities. And so this is an event that just talks about how we can be that voice within the faith community. And then on March 23rd, from fridge to furnace, we'll talk about energy efficiency. I've heard a statistic that churches, and this probably applies to other faith buildings as well, but waste about 30% of their energy. And just imagine if we could make our buildings more efficient, what we could apply that money towards. And then April 14th, solar powered faith communities. How can faith communities access these funds geared towards, solar power specifically to, cheapen the way that you get your electricity. And then next slide. And then in May, we're co-sponsoring an event about community benefits agreements. And Natalia might be able to tell you a little bit more about this, but in order to get some of the funds, organizations or communities need to put together a community benefits agreement to make sure that it benefits the community. And so ReImagine Appalachia is going to be a big part of making sure that people know how to write those up and how to create them. And Natalia, you can add anything there if I
this gets into the nitty gritty, which at some point we're going to have to do, right? So the nitty gritty is, there are some funding streams from the Department of Energy specifically that will, on the scoring of certain grants, and we're talking community grants. So the grants would probably be written by a community development organization or nonprofit or government agency. 20% of the scoring of those grants are going to have to be include a community benefits agreement structure. And so, as Kim said, they really need to show the benefit that this will give to the community. So it could be anything from local hiring. It could be local product sourcing. If we're going to use solar panels, where are those solar panels manufactured, for example? It could be making sure that low-income communities are prioritized in terms of job creation. It could be about, again, what are the energy benefits to some of our communities. So we're digging into that. A lot of the guidelines haven't been released, but there's a blog post that I will drop in the chat that actually explains a little bit of this more. But our Faith in Action team is going to be working with a number of other partners, because this is something that Appalachia, we need to know more about, right? Like, we need to be positioned for success for this. And so actually tomorrow, our keynote panel, hopefully you can make it, will be all around community benefits agreements. So come on to that.
And I saw it flash up on my screen that Jordy had a question about, first about whether or not he'd found the correct link for that community benefits agreement blog post. So Natalia will add that to the chat. And Jordy, we'll take questions in just a couple minutes. We're almost done with the presentation. So, and then, like I mentioned before, we have the ReImagine community model, and the Faith team created a toolkit that kind of takes that and, creates a wonderful toolkit, a step-by-step guide for faith groups that might want to lead these community conversations. And so we'll put the Faith in Action toolkit in the link, chat as well. And, it's very hands-on and very step-by-step, and just helps you to lead those conversations. And the idea is that, sometimes people don't want to come into, places of worship. They might feel uncomfortable, but if this is a place of worship that's leading a wonderful change in the community, then it might open up, the community to be more engaged with bodies of faith. So, and then we're also going to start a support network to help people that are implementing this within their communities, and just so that people have somebody to talk to about how it's going. And go to the next slide. Or is that the questions? Okay, go back. So in a few minutes, we'll jump into these questions, but I know that we have a couple of questions. I know at least Jordy has a question. Does anybody else, Jordy, if you want to go ahead and ask yours, and anybody else that has a question, if you can raise your hand, we can go ahead and take some questions now.
I'll hold back for a second. That's okay.
Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. So the rest of the time we were just going to use as discussion time, and we can also save some time for questions at the end. But just wanted to start out with, and you can either raise your hand and we can call on you, or you can come off mute and talk, or put the information in the chat. But what is a major need for your community at this moment in time? And I think this answer could be very different for different communities. I can take a stab at it. So I live in Cambria County, Pennsylvania, and we're a former coal mining community. There are still some coal jobs here, but not that many. We do also have a lot of oil and gas sites within the county. And so I think our community needs awareness of the impacts that this has on the community. And we need to balance that with an understanding that these are jobs, and that, maybe transitioning to more clean energy could create some jobs and also clean up the air that we breathe and the water that we drink at the same time.
I agree with Kim. Hi, this is Kathy from PAIPL, that we certainly need access to more clean jobs and cleaner air and cleaner water in our communities. I've been recently talking with individuals in various faith-based communities in our environmental education series about energy, water, and waste conservation, and environmental justice and climate change. And these are programs that are directed to people, not to the organizations. So what I'm learning from these people is they just need more information. They are very, very busy. It's difficult for them to find the time to even come to presentations, even virtual. And some of them don't have access to sophisticated platforms like Zoom in order to attend virtual presentations. And those who need to come in person are so busy with childcare responsibilities and work responsibilities that it's difficult for them to find the time on a regular basis to come. So I'm learning to streamline some of my presentations to give them more information for what they can do at home, within their workplaces, within their faith organizations, within their communities. So I can get the information to them fast and furious so they don't have to attend as many longer sessions. They also love receiving items such as compost bins and rain barrels so that they can deploy conservation strategies at home. So far, what I can see is they don't have time to volunteer to be part of a tree planting event or a watershed protection event. So I'm learning about ways that I can involve them in those types of activities so they can gain more exposure to the environment. I see we're going to be leaving a little bit earlier than expected. And that's one of the issues that I'm trying to stress is the people that I work with in environmental justice communities need more exposure to the natural environment, because they typically in the communities I'm working with right now are dense urban communities, so they're not rural or even suburban, so they need more green space. They need to have access to safe and effective green space, and they need to learn hiking and biking and kayaking types of activities so that they can live a healthier life, so we can improve their quality of life. So I think those are some of the needs we have right now. Sorry for being so quick, talking so fast, but.
Yeah, that looks like we actually have an extra few minutes. So, but we do have quite a few questions to get through. So does anybody have another major need in their community that differs from those that have already been discussed?
I think Robin has her hand up.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I missed that.
So I was just going to mention that in West Virginia, we have a great need for training of people to engage in energy efficiency monitoring and installations of more energy efficient appliances and things like that. And, you know, if we could get faith communities motivated to house some of those trainings and to engage some of their members in those trainings, that would be amazing. And it would overall increase the jobs in a certain community and be part of the economic transition that's possible through that type of work. So just wanted to mention that.
Yes, absolutely. Great point.
I'm seeing a bunch of comments in the chat.
I could talk about a need. I live in Lewisburg, a small borough in Union County, and I'm on the borough council. And like the ways in which like planning and transit and transportation are all like intertwined, right? So like we want to have more livable community, but doing that means interfacing with like other municipal governments, the state government. And so some of this is like we have a corridor that should have sidewalks to be more walkable, right? And one half is the borough, one half is another municipality, it's a state road. And like the whole thing is like for 15 years, people have been like, it'd be nice if this could happen. So there's like some of this, which is just kind of like those, like that friction of lots of moving pieces. And then in a similar vein, but a different facet of that is like a lot of our ordinances are really dated. So like we'd like to have more dense infill kind of development. But our ordinances basically require every new living unit to have an off-street parking, which kind of constrains that, right? But we actually know fewer people have cars on average. So there's some like local governance things here that I think could be important to like moving towards more rural transit, less car-based kind of economy and infrastructure, which isn't like as sexy, honestly, as some of this stuff, but it's like important. You know, there's like a self-selection bias. Like the people who are paying the most attention to these local ordinances sometimes are the people who are not throwing shade, but it's just like they don't want to see change.
Yeah, that's very true. I had some time to look at the chat while listening, and I see a lot of great conversations about making sure that we're bringing other people into this conversation, and that is absolutely something that the Faith in Action team is about. And we've spent a lot of time talking to that. We even had speakers come talk to us about, how we can do that, and this is part of the conversation we want to have today too. Is how can we bring people? Many of us come from Christian traditions, but we want to bring people in from other traditions as well to be a part of this conversation. Perry, I see that you have your hand raised.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to respond in agreement with the last couple of speakers, Jordy in particular, since we were talking in the chat. I'd like to continue some of the things you were just talking about boroughs working together with ordinances. I'm involved with some of that in my borough, Swissvale. I don't know if there's a way to, I don't see a way to connect with our emails. I can put mine in the chat, but I just want to, oh, and then the other thing was within my denominational work, which is the Presbyterian Church of America, UPCSA or USA, PCUSA. I'm sorry. I'm somewhat new, but I should know better. We have a really strong group in the climate lobby and have pushed through some really good policies at the denominational level. There is also a chapter of the climate lobby, and we have people in West Virginia. So part of our reason for participating here is to make connections in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia with people working from a Presbyterian faith-based perspective.
Yes, and if anybody is okay with us sharing information, go ahead and put it in the chat, and we can try to capture that afterwards and get it out to everybody that's okay having their information shared. I'll move on to the next question, which is, what is your faith's tradition in engaging with the public sphere? What are the foundational tenets of your and our work? And really, this is just about recognizing that there are some, I know within the Christian sphere, there are some that get pretty involved, and then there are some that kind of take a step back and get involved in different ways than being involved in politics. And so just curious what the different traditions are on this in this room, and how we can, how different groups engage and how you're interested in engaging.
Barry, thank you for saying hi, and I'll answer that, but the first kind of goes on from the conversation in the chat. There's a group in my area called the Susquehanna Valley Ethical Society, and I confess to ignorance, I don't know if ethical society is a thing that pops up other places, but they definitely, just knowing their newsletter, they're meant to be a gathering place for people with a lot of those secular perspectives to be in community with each other and to kind of maximize their impact locally. So, and I think, maybe not everybody who has those value perspectives or faith perspectives, the ones you were talking about, maybe some of them aren't joiners, they just don't want to be a part of any, which is fine too. But in terms of, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, so probably most people have some idea, but for us, in terms of public engagement, and I'm also on the board for something called UU Justice PA, and I saw there was one or two other UUs in the chat in other states, and I think many states have these. It's basically a state, we're a 501c3c4, so we're set up to do citizen advocacy and lobbying around the ways in which our faith principles intersect with public policy, but at the state level, not federal. So one of the things we've talked about in the last couple of years, I've only been on the board for a couple of years, but we're pushing everybody who's part of our congregations to think about being involved in some level, whatever that is for you, in the democratic process, you should think of that as part of your faith, right? Not sort of wall things off and be like, I don't do that. So that might be running for office or helping somebody run for office, or especially in the last couple of years, we know we need judges of elections, clerks of elections, those people who are at the polling place, who are part of the election administration. And I know in a lot of rural areas, at least in Pennsylvania, those places, those positions were decimated by older people and COVID. Not that they themselves passed away, maybe they did. Anyway, there were sort of big gaps, and so that's a place where people could step in, and it's so critical. I don't want to take us too far afield, but one of the reasons that 2020 and 21 and 22 that we did have a peaceful transfer of power is because our system is so decentralized. We have so many people, at those polling places being the person who administers election laws, and we just need left, right, center people who care about the process more. So that's an example where our faith is like democracy matters, but we translate that into, you should make it a goal in your life to do this at least once, right? Like volunteer for a campaign or run for office. And I think just getting that conversation going has been helpful.
Wonderful. Those are some great examples. The next question is, what are the common values and guiding principles do we have to engage in these issues and address the harms in our communities? We come from a lot of different faith traditions, and I think, I don't know if any of you have read Catherine Hayhoe's book, Saving Us, but a lot of what she talks about in general is just finding the common ground, or finding what somebody else values and then relating creation care or, climate advocacy and that kind of thing to them. So I think it's important for us as a group to understand what our common values and guiding principles are that we have in common. So does anybody have any of those that they'd like to share? I see, Iman, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I was between calls previously when the strategic planning session started today. Your brother Safik Kadavik from ISNA Islamic Society of North America, the DC office. We do a lot of work on the environment with IPL, Green Faith, and a whole host of other religious groups in Washington, DC at the national level. On environmental issues, finding the common ground that we stand on, and the common values, especially within the Abrahamic faith traditions, with regard to various matters. ISNA has been very strong champion since 2016 on the fossil fuel divestment movement. We've been the critical part of that movement from the Muslim perspective, and reinvestment in renewable energy solutions. We're looking to find ways in which we can work more at the local level through the 2,700 to 3,000 mosques that are on the ground across the country, including in the Appalachia area. And so be very interested to find ways in which we can share through either webinars, informational sessions, et cetera. We're relatively new to ReImagine. I started actually in the office last year and been busy working on a whole host of fronts because the office was closed for several years because of COVID and some reorganization issues prior to that. So looking forward to learning more about the work that you all are doing, and finding ways in which we can partner and participate. I was wondering, do you have something like a common statement? IPL has sort of been taking the lead a lot on this in terms of interfaith statements. Would you have sort of a common statement of principles or ideas or guiding principles that are part of the faith in action work that you all are doing for ReImagine Appalachia? Because I think it's very important to highlight, as was mentioned before, the various religious traditions, spiritual communities and spiritual teachings that are part and parcel of the communities that are being inundated and severely impacted by climate change and the policies that have been put in place that are allowing that to continue. So once again, we're open to future conversations, discussions, possible webinars, the sharing, and if there's sort of a common document that we're sharing with regard to the guiding principles from the different faith traditions that people can sort of maybe sign on to, and then that can be utilized possibly in webinars informing the religious communities in particular about access to the various grants of the IRA. We're working with the DOE, we're working with the EPA on various types of webinars and programming specific to the Muslim community, but Would love to partner with regard to, multi-faith informational sessions, especially. The other thing I just wanted to mention is many of our congregations and mosques that we work with, like many other communities, do not have the full-time staff and expertise to unpack the details of accessing the grants. So throwing a huge document on that the White House says, and there's like 101 links in it, is not something that is easily done. We don't have full-time staff at many of our mosques in terms of beyond the imam and maybe a secretary. And once again, the expertise is not there. So I think that there's a way to handhold our congregations to ensure that they get what they deserve as part of the, especially the IRA package with regard to various grants that are available. And it's always easy to throw a webinar and to throw a document with 100 links in it to somebody and say, I did my job, but that doesn't result in actual congregations receiving the funds that are due to them to be able to somehow mitigate the impacts of climate change. So anything we can do to help and be a part of that, we would very much like to be a part of those types of informational sessions, making it simple, make it plain, as we used to say in the streets in Newark, make it plain.
Yes. Thank you for that. There's so much in there to unpack, but definitely, I think I mentioned at the beginning, I know you said you came late, so I'm not sure exactly where you came, but we, are about a year old and are looking to expand and get, diversity of voices. So we would love to have your voice. And we have some events coming up where we are trying to make it simple for people, and they're on the screen there. And I think you can find them on the ReImagine Appalachia website. But really, I know that there's so much in the Inflation Reduction Act that we need to translate for different, bodies of worship to make sure that people understand how they can access some of these funds and make it much easier for them to do. And I'm hoping that it gets easier as we get more information. Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, oh, I'm sorry. I see Kathy, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thanks, Kim. I just wanted to mention, I've gone through a good bit of the guidebook that was put out by the White House and the spreadsheet that they put out that accompanies the guidebook. If anyone has any questions about how they might find a specific grant to meet their needs, please feel free to reach out. I put my contact information in the chat. There's 180 rows in the spreadsheet, and many of them are not going to be applicable to the work that we do at PAIPL. Many of them are for, but they might be applicable for you. Many of them are geared towards agriculture and tribal groups, which we don't have a lot of access to in Pennsylvania, but others may. We're reaching out to more rural communities, so the ag grants might be helpful in the future. But I did highlight the ones that I thought would be most useful for the broader population. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands that Faith in Action and PAIPL, Faith in Action at ReImagine Appalachia and PAIPL, we're interfaith communities. So we really strive to incorporate the mission goals of all faith-based groups, and we have really focused on moral and ethical values. So we in PAIPL, I always say we have everyone from A to Z, atheists to Zen Buddhists. So we because atheists are moral and ethical people too, even though they don't subscribe to a particular religion. So we don't want to leave anybody out. But you have to be quite careful with the way that you talk to people in varied communities, because they can become insulted. But particularly in Pennsylvania, we have a separate sort of advocacy arm that Amani Reed, who's working with ReImagine Appalachia, now works on with us too. Particularly in Pennsylvania, the way our state legislature is organized, if we don't involve communities of faith and elect people who are more open to conversations about how we need to preserve the environment and people's rights and provide funding for people who are left out, we won't get anywhere, because the ruling party has control over all of the committees. So they'll never get bills out of committees if we don't elect people who are going to be really interested in meeting our needs. So we really need to work on that. Yeah, I can share the spreadsheet. And Natalia was just asking me. I'll try to get
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen that, so I would love to see that. So.
Oh, you know, our sacred texts and moral values from all faith-based groups require us to protect creation and those who are lacking in injustice, so who are in unjust situations. So we really are called to do that. I think it's important that we encourage, particularly people who call themselves conservatives, tend to be religious, so they have to move outside of their comfort zone a little bit, and this is difficult. It's extremely difficult. I think we're going to take baby steps and we're going to get there eventually, but we can't go imagine that we're going to go into a community and talk about climate change and suddenly engage everybody in a faith-based discussion. If in some cases, when conservative religious people hear the word climate change, they run for the exits, or they don't even allow us to come and present at their organization. So we have to be creative in ways that we draw them into the discussion so they really walk the walk instead of just talking the talk about how they're called to be stewards of the earth and all people.
Yeah, and the Evangelical Environmental Network, our audience is conservative, and so we have a unique voice in this, and we focus a lot on children's health because that is, again, we're taking a shared value and kind of expanding it into, what people care about, and then you can kind of get people's attention. So, Jordy, I see you have your hand raised.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't know. Two things. One, about that last point. I don't know, I can't remember his name, and so I haven't been able to track it down since then, but I saw a guy once present, and maybe other people have seen this research. He was in rural Minnesota, and he and some other folks went and they did basically what we would call climate change messaging in rural communities, but they basically, I think, kind of did a field test, switching it out with like stewardship things, like, we need to make sure that there's wild spaces for hunting and fishing. I think others have seen this. And basically, it got people to the same place of agreement on policy. They never even said climate change, right? It's like, we sort of have a joke with some of my friends here that Green New Deal in rural areas was dead on arrival just because of the way the framing works against this. So that was one thing. The second thing I just wanted to throw out from earlier, the community benefits agreement. Like, I was fascinated by that, and maybe in other states too. Like, this is maybe a little bit adjacent or overlapping with our conversation, but it might be helpful in terms of securing some of this funding with larger anchor institutions. I'm horrified at how many really large nonprofits that are technically nonprofits do not behave not like nonprofits, by which I mean the large hospital systems that dominate a lot in PA are sitting on huge piles of cash. A lot of institutes of higher learning, like I live in a town with Bucknell University, that get massive tax subsidies. And if they tried to quantify what their public good was, it's pretty minimal. So I wonder if those community benefit things could start to also be a bit of a leverage to nudge those entities that especially sit in rural areas and sit on these massive tax subsidies to more specifically delineate what they're doing, because a lot of them, what I like to say is they behave like rapacious corporations underneath the fig leaf of a 501c3. Not to put my opinions out there too strongly, but
yeah, I think that's all very interesting. I think community benefit agreements could have a wide impact. So, I feel like we've kind of talked about the next two questions, in the subtext of a lot of the other comments that we've said, and I want to get to the last few questions here. These kind of all go together. Who in our communities are left out of this conversation? Why are they left out, and how can we reach or partner with them? And any ideas you have here, and of who we can reach out to and how we can do that, that would be great. We have about 2 minutes left, so if you have ideas, you want to put them in the chat, and then anybody can raise their hand and speak as well.
I'll put in my 2 cents. Hi, I know I'm from ReImagine, and I also attend a church that has lost a lot of population over the past few years, and we have I agree with what many people are saying. I think with many houses of worship, this may be the case where Someone said, make it plain. Making it plain is kind of what we're trying to do in ReImagine, but we're kind of trying to build the plane as we're, no pun intended, build the plane as we're flying it. We're dealing with so many things in our houses, in my house of worship. We're dealing with water damage. We're dealing with lack of energy efficiency. We're dealing with wanting to save money. We're dealing with community outreach issues and trying to get more people inside our doors. And I think this could be a really nice opportunity, particularly with the community organizing model, which we'll talk more about tomorrow, to kind of intersect all of these things together. How do we bring people in the church? How do we connect people to different funding streams while making it seem like a lot of our churches and houses of worship and faith traditions, I think, are panicking, particularly in places that are losing population. And I think a lot of times too, our houses of worship and our faith traditions are front lines on disaster relief, but are also losing population. So I think this might be a nice way to try to figure out how to tie all this together, is through these sustainability issues, even if we can't use the word sustainable or climate.
Wonderful. Well, I think that is a good place to end. If you think of anything, you want to add anything, or if you want to join our team, Natalia put her email in the chat early on, so you can reach out to her. We'd love to have more voices. Like we said from the very beginning, you know, we have a limited kind of breadth of voices, and would love to have people from other faith traditions be a part of what it is that we're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you all. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks for all your hard work.
Oh wow, the number's really climbing.
We are coming back.
Yeah, everyone's coming back. We're so eager to hear how your conversations went. Just give it another little bit here to make sure everyone's back in, but thanks for hopping back.
So are the breakout rooms open again? Annie, just let me know. So it's going to take us a minute to set up the next round of breakout groups, but just so folks know how things are going to go in a minute. Annie, just interrupt me when the breakout rooms are open. Okay.